Hello and welcome to the Aviation Briefing with me, William Hallowell. In this podcast series, I speak with media and industry guests about the biggest stories and issues in aviation. Today, I'm joined by Shashank Nigam, who is the founder and CEO of Simply Flying, and we're going to be talking a bit about last week's report by the UK Civil Aviation Authority about the air traffic control failures that took place and caused quite a bit of chaos in August last year. So firstly, thank you very much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
So let's kick off. Let's talk about the report. In terms of the key findings, what do we know so far? Obviously, it was an interim report into the August 2023 air traffic control failures. We don't have all the details yet because, as I say, this is an interim report and we are expecting more information towards the end of this year. But can you give us an idea of essentially what the key findings are of what the CAA had to say last week?
Yeah, I think there was an incident which resulted in 700,000 passengers being impacted due to flight delays and cancellations, which basically emerged from one specific flight from Los Angeles to Paris, whose flight plan processing data was not being entered correctly, and there was some critical exception errors, which then snowballed into entire ANSPs, which is air navigation service providers, because they require this planning data, and the exception is snowball, resulting in a lot of cancellations and inconvenience for passengers.
Obviously, as you say, it did affect hundreds of thousands of passengers, not just in the UK, obviously, but abroad as well. I remember reporting on the kind of incidents as it was unfolding, and there were passengers coming to me and saying, basically giving their stories. But in terms of the new information that we have from this report, in terms of the causes, one line that many media reports went with was the impact of engineers who were working or do work on the ATC system working from home and therefore a delayed response. I mean, in your view, did it have that much of an impact?
So I think the critical point there is the system switching from automated to manual flight plans. And normally, the system can process 800 flight plans per hour, but switching it to manual mode reduces it down to 60 flights per hour. And that's what led to this entire backlog of flights waiting to be processed to come into land or take off, for example. I do believe that the controllers working from home might have had an impact, but I don't believe that was critical in this situation.
The report itself, I believe, I think I read the first kind of half of it. It was about 50 pages, so there was a lot to digest. But it seems, that, as I said, there was so much information in there. And from my understanding, that kind of working from home element was such a small part of the, the wider incident itself. Why do you think there has been so much focus on that aspect specifically when it comes to, the fact that the system itself failed because the wrong flight information was put into the system?
Sometimes I feel that that's the lowest hanging fruit. Let's just get all the controllers back in the office. But I think what's the big win for future avoidance of such occurrences is different agencies working better together, different air traffic control systems and governments basically ensuring the dream of a single European sky, for example, comes true. If that was the reality, then this would be less likely to occur. So yes, it is one of the factors, but it's just the easiest one for regulators or others to tick on and tick the box, as opposed to many other factors which will have much bigger ramifications if they were done right in the future.
It does seem that communication certainly, or lack of communication certainly played a part because, I think one thing that the UK CAA's report, focuses on is the fact that there was so little collaboration working together between the airports, airlines, all the stakeholders, that I believe at one point in the report, it actually mentions that some airlines only found out about the incident, the air traffic control failures as a result of media reports, rather than hearing that from, stakeholders themselves, which, from an industry and I suppose passenger perspective as well is quite alarming, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think that's the scary part. Communications has to be critical, not just to customers and passengers, but also to the airlines. And a good example in this case that comes to mind is Lufthansa, which is the German airline which recently went through a series of strikes. And their goal is not a single passenger shows up to the airport to find out their flight was canceled. They want to make sure that everyone knows not to come to the airport 2 days in advance, a day in advance, as long as they know before they leave for the airport. Similar proactive measures should be taken by the authorities in informing airlines as well as customers, such that the inconvenience can be dramatically reduced.
And I mean, one aspect that certainly stood out to me was the role specifically that airlines had to play. The report itself says that, you know, they were distributing leaflets to passengers at the airports, you know, where passengers were stranded. The word misinformation was used with regard to passenger rights, which again is quite alarming. Certainly in the UK, you know, the airline industry is quite often under fire for things like hidden fees and other aspects like that. But, you know, there was quite a strong criticism, I think, from, you know, what the report detailed in terms of, you know, a kind of failure to uphold those passenger rights. Because when incidents like this occur, you know, the airlines are, you know, they are duty bound to provide, you know, rerouting, alternative flights where necessary, food and drink vouchers, accommodation where applicable. But it seems that across the board, almost, this wasn't the case, apart from in, you know, certain aspects. Not all airlines were bad at, you know, providing passengers not just the information but the help they needed. But that's quite a damning indictment of the airline industry as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think airlines need to pay more attention to what builds trust versus what erodes trust with customers. And it is in times like these that there is the opportunity to build and rebuild trust. If you can keep your passengers informed of the right amount of information, that's what builds trust. In this case, I think there's a subtle difference between misinformation and lack of information. What was a lack of information on the airline's part? They didn't have all the information, was then passed on to passengers, which was then construed as misinformation. I'm sure no airline intended to misguide the passengers, but if the airline managers themselves do not know when the flight will be landing or when it will be taken off, then they can't provide that information. So I think overall, this was a cascading sense of failure when it comes to misinformation and lack of information that, you know, ultimately caused a lot of trouble.
I suppose, though, where things like passenger rights are involved, surely, you know, the airlines will know what their duties are in terms of, you know, what to provide passengers with in instances like this. And these leaflets that were, you know, being distributed allegedly were saying that, you know, passengers had to make their own way home and then claim, you know, reimbursement once they were back home. And, you know, that actually is incorrect, isn't it? So, you know, can it really be said that, you know, it all just is airlines working off the information they have? Surely there is some form of obligation for them, even if they don't know what passengers' rights are. It's surely an obligation that they should know what they are and be able to inform passengers of this at the same time.
Absolutely. I think it is truly the airline's responsibility to keep passengers informed. Some of the best airlines that do it win customer confidence. It's not just about giving food vouchers, but, you know, like the simple case of Lufthansa has stated, ensuring that passengers don't even show up to the airport to find out that their flight is canceled. They should just be home, hence reducing the chaos at the airport or any nervousness or panic at the airport in itself. That's where I think the airlines that invested in technology, automated SMS service or automated emails linked directly to their systems, which go out through their apps, for example, do well. Because time and time again, you don't have to call the airline's call center, be held in a queue for a long time to figure out what's happening to my flight. When is it leaving? You can just get a simple notification on the app. And I think some of the US airlines are doing well at this, from United Airlines, which tells you if a gate change happens right when their system knows, even before the display at the airport is updated, you will find out through their app. Or I think Delta and Air Canada, which now have baggage tracking in their app. So you can know exactly when your bag is being loaded onto the belt, whether it's out or not. You don't have to figure out whether your bag was left somewhere, for example. So I think the European airlines have some bit to catch up there.
On that basis, then, I mean, in the report itself, I mean, the investigative panel for the Civil Aviation Authority actually say that airlines refuse to give the investigators access to passenger lists from the affected flights to understand, to ascertain exactly how widespread the issue was, and also to understand, you know, whether these passengers have been reimbursed, compensated. Isn't it surely reflective of airlines' attitude, the industry's attitude, if they were refusing to give those details, you know, and help the investigation and to, you know, get a better understanding of what went wrong and how to avoid a similar situation happening, at least to the same extent in future if there is a similar incident?
I'm personally not sure whether there were any legal grounds for airlines not sharing this data with a third party, maybe GDPR or something else, why they could not share this data. But at the very least, they could have shared aggregate numbers that this percentage of total passengers received compensation, or this percentage of total passengers were put on alternative flights to the same destination within 24 hours. I think aggregate numbers should have been shared. Having said that, I do believe airlines are right to hold ground on GDPR basis, sharing individual passengers' data with third parties.
And some airlines' reactions have been stronger than others. I mean, I remember in December just gone, Ryanair CEO, you know, Michael O'Leary called for the resignation of Martin Rolfe, you know, the CEO of NATS, who are obviously in charge of UK airspace and air traffic control. Ryanair are well known for making their own voices heard within the industry when they feel frustrated. But does that seem like a bit of an extreme reaction? Because it seems like out of the bunch, in terms of, you know, UK airlines, they have certainly had the strongest reaction. Do you think that that is a legitimate, you know, are their feelings legitimate, or do you think that it might be a bit of a strong reaction when you look at other airlines who haven't been so provocative, I suppose, for lack of a better word?
Well, I think Michael O'Leary is very much on brand when it comes to the way he is reacting. Ryanair almost always reacts strongly to what's happening around, and they always make sure that their voice is heard. In this case, they are fighting for the rights of the airlines, potentially even the customers, because ultimately they were inconvenienced. Ryanair cares about making money as a business, so anything that helps them make money due to no fault of their own, they will raise their voice. So I would not say it's representative of the entire industry's attitude, but they are well within their rights to raise their voice and share their opinion on the entire fiasco.
I suppose it is an interesting one because, again, on Ryanair, they claim that they spent over £15 million to cover the costs where we were talking about passenger rights and providing the right accommodation and rerouting passengers. And the report itself highlights that there was considerable financial and emotional consequences for passengers. And you're talking about, you know, building a trust, building a rapport with airlines. How do they then build that back? Because the investigation itself spoke with a number of passengers, all who felt that the correct information wasn't provided, and even where there were no updates to give customers, airlines were failing to at least give those reassurances. And understandably, you know, they must have been in, like you say, a panic themselves. They might not have had all the information, but surely it's also in their interest, when you're talking about, you know, trust and rapport, to provide those assurances rather than either not give any assurances or actually provide the wrong information, which is going to, you know, naturally cause more alarm and distress on the part of the passenger as well.
Absolutely. It is in the airline's interest, and the sooner airline managers realize that, the better it will be. We are not looking to reinvent the wheel here. Tools have existed for over 10 years, which airlines have used around the world to notify passengers as soon as something happens. Airlines have the information. It's just about communicating the same information to passengers. Simple things like whether my bag has made it to my flight. Every airline knows the moment the bag is loaded or the moment the plane takes off, whether your bag is on the flight. Why do passengers need to wait till they land and an hour to figure out what's happening? So airlines should absolutely be investing in technologies like 15 Below, a UK startup, which sends notifications instantly to passengers.
So going forward, what more can we expect to find out? Because, as I said, this was an interim report. We're due a full investigation, a full report later on this year. Do you think we'll find out much more about the incident and the kind of chaos, for lack of a better word, that kind of unfolded? Or, you know, I mean, what's your assertion of that?
I think the current report clearly states out the triggers from that one flight, for example, that led to this major incident. What I do hope to find out is what led to the snowballing and how can that be prevented in the future? And not just about putting the blame on airlines or talking about inconvenienced passengers, but also what are the governments doing to ensure that this does not happen? Are we any closer to a single European sky or even a single UK plus a few other countries' sky, so that air navigation and air traffic control can be optimized, not just from a passenger convenience standpoint, but also sustainability, which is so critical these days, where we need not be burning a ton of extra carbon flying in these Roman highways we have in the sky that were designed in the 1960s. We have to be relevant to this century and the customers of today.
Well, look, Shashank, thank you very much for joining me today. It seems as though it's another one of those incidents of, lessons learned. It seems like that's, quite a frequent line in the aviation industry at the moment. But I'm sure we'll have more information about this. And as more information does come out, it will be interesting to see how the aviation industry, particularly the airlines, do address it going forward, and particularly, addressing your points about, rapport with customers as well.
Absolutely. I think trust is critical, and airlines and authorities should ensure that they build on it and not lose it.
Thank you very much for joining me on this episode of the Aviation Briefing with William Hallowell.